What's up, guys? I'm Gunner, bringing you another episode of the GMoney poker vlog. Couple of announcements before we get started. I created a Telegram group to bring all the PLO crushers together. We've been sharing hand analysis and solver analysis. Shoot me a DM on Instagram if you're interested in joining. Also, I see there's about 5,000 of you that have watched multiple of my videos but haven't clicked that subscribe button. Please click it, it really helps the channel. Lastly, I've been using PLO Mastermind's free pre-flop skills trainer. It's been super helpful to work on my pre-flop game. If you're interested, there's a link below. Please go through that link as it helps the channel. Let's get into some hands. I get to the lodge around 11 and buy in for 2,000. After practicing my pre-flop ranges in PLO trainer, I look down at trip aces with an 8 and no suit on the button. There's 3 callers to me over a $10 straddle. This hand is probably just a fold, but my opponents have been playing overnight and we're somewhat deep, so I decided to make the call. A bit speculative, but here we are. Small blind now pots it to 75. There's 4 callers back to me. I'm getting a great price on a call. I'm in position, and my hand has key blockers to strong hands that could develop on later streets. Let's say a flush hits, I could potentially rep the nut flush as a bluff. I could also hit a set, and we're headed 6 ways to a flop, which comes 9, 4, 7 with 2 clubs. It checks to me. Given that I have the ace of clubs, I block key draws that my opponents could have. There are straight draws available, and I do have a pair of aces. I decide to bet around half pot for 200. Only the cutoff calls. We're headed heads up to the turn, which now comes the 6 of spades. This brings in potential straights, and after the cutoff checks to me, I decide to check it back for pot control. The river now comes the 4 of spades. So I make the nut 2 pair. The opponent now checks to me, and I have a decision on whether or not to bluff. I think this is a spot where all hands that beat me would be calling. Straights, trips, flushes, etc. Would probably find the call here, given the line I've taken. I decide that I don't need to turn my hand into a bluff, and I do have some showdown value against missed draws. So I decide to check it back. The opponent chose King 6, 5, 2, double suited. So he had the club draw and the open-ended straight draw. I'm going to take it down with my pair of aces and win about a $500 profit to start the session. Not long after, I look down at real aces. Ace, ace, 9, 7 with ace high diamonds in the $10 straddle. There's 2 limps before the low jack pots it to 55. The big blind calls, and I definitely want to pot it here, so I make it 245. Middle position now goes all in for 330. I call. We run it once, and the board comes 5 of hearts, queen of clubs, 3 of hearts. The turn's the ace of spades, giving me trips, and the river's the king of spades. I show my hand, my opponent mucks, and I'm going to take down another nice profit to start the session. A bunch of opponents leave the table at the same time. We were down to playing heads up to keep the game going, and 4 new opponents join. They're all short stacked, and I now look down at king, king, queen, jack, with queen high hearts on the button. There's no straddle, and under the gun opens for 15. Hijack and the cutoff make the call. Definitely going to pot it with kings in position here, so I raise it to 80. All 3 opponents make the call, and we're headed 4 ways to the flop. The flop comes 7, 3, deuce, rainbow. My opponents check to me. There's not a lot of strong hands for them to have on this board. Sets and wraps would be the top of their range. Given that my opponents only have about a pot-sized bet left at the maximum, I bet 300 to effectively put them all in. Under the gun calls for 220. Hijack goes all in for 350, and the cutoff calls for 120. I call the extra 50, and we're headed to a run out, which comes 6 of clubs, deuce of clubs. I show my hand, but the hijack did flop a set of 7s, and he's going to take this one down. I check my play with the solver by modeling a 3-way, 3-bet pot with the 50 big blind stack. The solver says this is a profitable pot on the flop here. Nonetheless, I'm going to lose, and I'm on to the next hand. Not long after, I look down at king, jack, 9, 8 double suited in the big blind. Hijack opens to 15, and the button and small blind call. I'm going to pot it with a connected double suited hand, so I raise to 75. Hijack and the small blind make the call. We're headed 3 ways to the flop, which comes ace, 10, 7, rainbow. I flop a wrap. Any 6, 8, 9, jack will give me a straight. I also have 2 backdoor flush draws. I'm going to pot it here to put pressure on my opponents. They both fold, and I drag another one. Not much happens for a couple hours, except a couple of fishy opponents joining the game. I look down at ace, king, 6, 5 with 3 spades in my hand on the button. Under the gun limps for 5. The cutoff raises to 20. I call, small blind, big blind, and under the gun come along. We're headed 5 ways to the flop, which comes 4, 3, deuce, rainbow. I flop the nut straight. It checks to me, and I bet pot. Only the small blind calls, and we're headed heads up to the turn, which comes the 7 of diamonds. This brings in a flush draw, but I still have the nuts. She only has 75 left. After she checks to me, I put her all in, and she calls. We run it twice. The first river is the jack of clubs, and the second is the 5 of hearts. My opponent table is ace, jack, 6, 4. She makes the same straight on the second run out, and I'm going to win 3/4 of this pot. Next up, I look down at ace, king, queen, 4 with ace high hearts. I'm in middle position, and there's a $10 straddle. Under the gun limps, and I pot it to 45. Low jack, button, and the straddle make the call. Under the gun now goes all in and says, let's gamble. I'm going to repot it here to try and isolate the under the gun player. Low jack, button, and the straddle all go all in as well. We're headed to 2 full boards. The first board comes jack, jack, 3. There's a 5 on the turn and a 6 on the river. Not much on that board for me. The second board comes 2 of hearts, 8 of diamonds, 4 of hearts. So I have a flush draw. The turn's the 5 of diamonds, and the river's the 5 of hearts. So I make the nut flush. The straddle shows queen, 9, 9, 4. Under the gun, king, jack, 10, 7. And the low jack shows ace, ace, 7, 3. So I'm going to lose the top board, but scoop the bottom board, and win a nice profit in this one. Next up, I look down at a beautiful hand. Ace, king, queen, jack, double suited on the button. Under the gun limps for 5, as well as the hijack and the cutoff. I raise it to 25. There's 5 callers, and we're headed 6 ways to the flop. The flop comes 8, 3, 7 with 2 spades. I flop the nut flush draw and a bunch of overcards. The hijack now bets 35, and the cutoff calls. My hand's strong enough to apply pressure and pot it here, which I do. Small blind and the hijack call. We're headed 3 ways to a turn, which comes the 7 of diamonds pairing the board. It checks to me, and I don't think betting here makes much sense. These opponents don't like to fold, and I don't have a made hand yet, so I check as well. The river now comes the queen of hearts, so I make a pair of queens with an ace kicker. It checks to me, and I think my hand has showdown value. My opponents also don't like to fold, but I don't think they would call with worse, so I check as well. Let's cut to the clip audio to see how it went down. Queen.
Oh, shit.
I like the sound of that. My opponents show their hand, and I'm good, and I'm going to take down a $1,000 pot. I now look down at ace, queen, 10, 9 with 3 spades in the $10 straddle. There's 5 limpers to me, and I pot it to 70. There's 4 callers, and we're headed 5 ways to the flop. The flop comes 2, 5, queen, rainbow. I decide to lead for 125, given that I have ace, queen, and draws to 2 pair outs. These opponents have shown a propensity to call light, so I think I can give value with my equity here. Middle position calls all in for 55. The button pushes all in for 130 total. The small blind calls 130, and I call for 5 more. I'm heads up for the side pot with the small blind to the turn, which comes the 8 of clubs. This doesn't improve my hand, so after she checks to me, I'm just going to check it back. The river now comes the 5 of diamonds pairing the board. She checks to me, and I'm going to take my showdown with 2 pair and the nut kicker. So I check. The small blind shows king, jack, 8 deuce. So she called with bottom pair on the flop, turn 2 pair, but was counterfeited on the river. And I'm going to scoop another one. We're playing a bomb pot. I look down at king, jack, 9, 7 with 3 clubs in the low jack position. We see boards of 9, 3, 9 with 2 diamonds on the top and 2, 10, 8 rainbow on the bottom. So I flop trips on the top and then a wrap on the bottom. This is about as good as it gets. I have 3 overs on the top to make a better boat if someone does have a boat. And given that the board's rainbow on the bottom, I won't have to fade flush draws as often. The big blind leads for 100. Under the gun calls. There's definitely a case for raising here, given how strong my hand is on both boards. But for the same reason, I can call to invite more opponents into the pot. And that's what I end up doing. The cutoff now pushes all in for 185. Big blind, under the gun, and myself call. We're headed 3 ways to the turn, which comes the queen of clubs on the top board and the jack of spades on the bottom board. I still only have trips on the top, but I now have a straight on the bottom board. Big blind leads all in for 200. Under the gun folds. I'm going nowhere, so I make the call. The river's the 7 of diamonds on the top, giving me a boat, and the 3 of spades on the bottom, so I have the second nuts on that board. I show my hand. The big blind says, only a little boat, and the cutoff shows 9-3, 8 king, so he flopped the boat on the top board. But I'm going to realize my equity and scoop this pot. After winning all those hands, the stack's now over $5,000 for my $2,000 buy-in. I now look down at double suited aces, spades, and hearts with the 5-4 in the small blind. Under the gun, cutoff, and the button all limp. I raise it up to 35. There's 3 callers, and we're headed 4 ways to the flop, which comes 9, 6, 7, rainbow. There is a heart and a spade, so I have backdoor flush potential, but I don't think my hand has enough value to bet into 3 opponents, so I check, and it checks around. The turn brings the queen of hearts, so I turn the heart draw. I want to bet here and apply pressure after my opponent showed disinterest on the flop, so I bet 110. Under the gun and cutoff call. We're headed 3 ways to the river, which is the king of hearts. I make the ace high flush. Let's go. I do lose the jack 10 of hearts, but I'm not going to be worried about that here, given that my opponents don't have too much money in front of them. I decide to pot it for 475, given that these opponents like to call light. Under the gun ends up calling for 355. It's now on the cutoff, who's saying, oh man, I shouldn't be making this call. Oh, I'm going to lose again, before making the call. I love to hear it. I show my hand, and I'm good. Gonna scoop a big pot here. Man, why can't poker always be this easy? 6 hours into the session, I'm now sitting on 6,000 plus after buying it for 2,000. I now look down at king 10, 9, 8 with king high hearts in the $10 straddle. Middle position raises to 35. The small blind calls, and I call as well. We head 3 ways to a flop, which comes 4, queen, 7 with 2 hearts. I flop the heart draw. I check the middle position, who bets 80. The small blind calls, and I call as well. We're headed 3 ways to the turn, which comes the board pairing 4 of spades. The small blind now checks to me. This will be a scare card if my opponents also have a heart draw, or maybe flopped a wrap, or have a hand like aces. So I decided to donk out here for 175. Both opponents fold. I show the bluff, and I'm going to take it down. After playing 7 hours in a fishy game, I decide to rack up. I cash out $6,250, the biggest ever win on the vlog, after a huge win last vlog. I've been running really hot. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video. See you in the next vlog.